Today we're going to be looking at an introduction to British etiquette. Etiquette is a way that describes how someone should behave at work or in a social situations, when meeting friends, in pubs, out in the streets, in supermarkets, etc., etc. What have you noticed, if anything, that is different about how British people behave with each other, or people in this country behave with each other? For example, if you look at adults, men and women, or adults with children, have you noticed anything different? What about the fact that a lot of people here seem to be walking around in the park with pets, for example? PDA is an acronym that means Public Display of Affection. You will have noticed that in this country it's quite common for couples to hold hands in public, to hug one another, and even to kiss in the park or while out having fun at parties or clubs. It's perfectly acceptable to do that. In fact, a recent research shows that kissing in public is fine with most Brits. A huge majority, 92% of Britons, say that holding hands in public is acceptable, and 90% say that goes the same for hugging. And 2/3 are also comfortable with people around them kissing. With regards to etiquette, it's also very important to understand how adults generally should behave with their relationship with their children, whether they are their own children or those of others. In some cultures, for example, it's considered to be okay to hit a child if that child is misbehaved. Is seen as a way to help the child to understand what they've done wrong, for example. And some people here in this country as well will think that hitting a child is okay as a way of punishing a child if they've done something wrong. However, what has to be borne in mind is that in this country there is a law, the Children Act 2004, that stipulates that it is illegal. In other words, it is not allowed, someone is not allowed to hit a child if the force results in bruising, swelling, cuts, grazes or scratches. It is normally understood that if one hits a child and there is a mark left on that child, then that is probably an illegal act. Culturally, most people will find witnessing smacking a child or even shouting at a child in public very, very inappropriate. With regards to the interaction between adults and children, in some cultures it's perfectly okay to go and hug a child that is not your own, or pat the child on the head, or even play with the child. In this country, most people will find that kind of interaction very bizarre, very strange. In other words, if you find yourself in a park and the advice would be to avoid walking up to a child unless you know that parent and unless you have consent from that parent to have a physical interaction with the child. So we need to be careful here, because what I'm saying is that it's okay to wave and to be polite and friendly, but we need to be very careful about our physical interaction. At our presentations and times at the lunch drop-ins, many times children that are present get passed around from person to person, but that would be found to be a bit odd within an English culture if the people do not know one another that well. Going back to etiquette, and let's look at greetings, because that's a very, very important part of any culture. In this country, generally speaking, you will, when you're introduced to a new person, you will shake their hands. That is especially true if it is, for example, a formal situation like a work environment. You know, say you're going for an interview, sometimes people will offer you their hand and it's considered very rude to refuse it. Most often than not, say if you are with a friend and introduce you to somebody, then sometimes you might opt to shake hands, but other times you just say simple hello as well. Most people here will not kiss and hug if they're introduced to somebody that is new to them. Most people here will kiss and hug if they are meeting with a friend or a relative, somebody that is known to them and they haven't seen in a long time. As with regards to the kissing, most often than not, it will be one kiss on one cheek, contrary to some other cultures where it might be 2 kisses or even 4. Usually speaking, some people ask, what's a wave? When do I wave at people? And I think here it can be quite loose. You know, you can wave if you see somebody at a distance, for example. I think it would probably be considered a bit odd if you've had a conversation with somebody and at the point of leaving you waved at them, unless you possibly there is a child involved and in the exchange. Manners. Manners is a word that basically signifies how somebody behaves in a context. And you will see from the picture that queuing is a very, very British notion. Most people that come to this country from overseas or from most European countries or say African continents, for example, as well, will find the notion of queuing rather bizarre, as that's certainly what happened to me coming over here and being confronted with this notion that I need to queue everywhere. If I'm in a public toilet, I queue. At supermarkets, I queue. Taking the bus, I queue. It's very important. If you step out of the line of queuing, you will be considered to be very, very rude, and don't be surprised if someone has a go at you, if someone kind of gets angry and tells you to get back in the line, because as I said, that's considered to be very important here as a sign of respect, I guess. Other things that some people might find a bit odd is the frequency of the word please and thank you used here. Whenever you make a request, if you ask somebody to do something for you, you will always need to use the word please, whether at the end or at the beginning of a sentence. It's extremely important. And similarly, if someone then gives, if that request is met, you always say thank you. Another thing that I personally found it really odd here, for example, is the expression I'm sorry, and how frequent that is used, how frequently that's used. For example, you will find that you're walking down the street, you bumped into somebody, and even if it's not your fault or whatever else, you just automatically will hear them saying I'm sorry, and you are also expected to say I'm sorry. You will pick this up as you interact more and more within this culture. But yes, please remember using the please. I've just used it myself there. The thank you when you receive something. The I'm sorry if you accidentally bump into somebody, for example. And the excuse me if you need to interrupt a conversation. You don't just butt in. You would kind of signal that you want to come into a conversation. Say, oh, excuse me, and kind of maybe then start talking rather than interrupting. Another thing that is really, really important in this country is timekeeping, which again I found a bit difficult coming from an Italian background. Not that all Italians find difficult to keep time, but I certainly did. So, 9 o'clock here means 9 o'clock. It's considered to be very, very rude to be late unless you let somebody know that you're going to be late. And that goes whether it's a friend or an invitation to dinner or at work, especially at work. So if you're going to be late, you must let people know. And finally, the notion of pets. What are pets? Pets are basically domesticated animals. Roughly 50% of the UK adults population own a pet, whether it's a cat or a dog. Those are the most common pets. There are 9 million dogs and 8 million cats in the UK. But also, some people will have rabbits. Some people will have fish. Some people will have reptiles like snakes and lizards. Pets are really considered to be very important within this culture. Most people will spend a lot of money actually on pet food and accessories like leads and collars or even clothes for their pets. And obviously they have pet doctors here, which are called vets, and they're not just, in some cultures, vets primarily look after cattle and farm animals. In this culture, they will look primarily after domestic animals. So you have vet practices. They will also then have vet practices, obviously, with vets for farm animals. One thing that has to be remembered, no matter how scared you might be, if you come into contact with a dog and you get scared, whatever you do, do not kick the dog or the cat. People will take offense at that and they will become extremely angry. Most people will become extremely angry if you kick their cat or dogs. They will see it as an attack on the pet. And finally, I found a quiz online, which is kind of okay. I suggest that you have a go, maybe testing your knowledge to see how much you know of British life. There are a couple of questions around things that we talked about, some other things around politics and elections, and some things about working culture. So, it's free of charge. If you want to have a go, please do follow the link that is on the last slide. And remember, with all the information I've given you today, as well as with the quiz, always kind of remember that we need to use the word most and often. We cannot make generalizations. What we said, it applies to most people, but not to all. There will be variations in lifestyle and approaches, which depends on where you live, whether, who you work for, and ultimately as well, who you are, how you present yourself and how other people will perceive you.